Every Tuesday morning for 11 weeks. I came outside to the same scene. Garbage everywhere. Coffee grounds stretched across 30 feet of driveway. My bin cracked open on the pavement like something had hit it at speed, and the specific pattern of how the contents scattered, not random, not blown by wind, but the tight, consistent splatter of something that had been struck deliberately and hard, told me exactly what had happened before my neighbor across the street ever had to say a word. She said it anyway. Diana Pulver had watched the whole thing from her kitchen window. She'd seen Carla Olmsted, president of the Bramblewood Estates Hawaii, driver of an impossibly pristine white Acura that she washed twice a week, ease that car into my garbage container at about 12 miles an hour, reverse, watch the damage for a moment, and drive away. Diana told me this in a whisper, the way people in that neighborhood had learned to share information about Carla. Quickly, quietly, looking over their shoulder first. If you've ever lived somewhere with a HOA president who treats the community like her personal property, drop your city in the comments. What I did over the next 8 weeks is either going to make you angry on my behalf or make you want to take a course in structural engineering. Possibly both. My name is Marcus Bellew, 44 years old, commercial plumber, 18 years in the trade. I moved to Bramblewood Estates in late 2022 with my 15-year-old daughter Cleo after her mother and I divorced. The school district was the deciding factor. Cleo had already lost enough stability that year. I was not going to let her also lose her friendships and her teachers. We found a house on Alder Court, and I paid a deposit on the place before I had fully registered what kind of HOA it came with. Carla Olmsted had been president of the Bramblewood Estates HOA for 9 years. By the time I arrived, she had accumulated the kind of institutional authority that people acquire when they've been in a position long enough that most residents have simply stopped questioning it. She drove her spotless white Acura through the neighborhood with the proprietary ease of someone conducting an inspection. Her voice, when she spoke at OA meetings, had the precise, clipped quality of someone who has grown accustomed to having the last word. I had no particular conflict with her for the first 3 weeks. I kept my yard neat, put my bin out on the right day, introduced myself to neighbors. Standard new arrival behavior. Then on a Tuesday morning in January, I came back from dropping Cleo at school to find the driveway disaster that would define the next several months of my life. The first time I assumed animals, the second time I assumed wind. The third time Diana Pulver appeared at her fence, with the specific expression of someone who has been waiting for permission to say something and has finally decided to say it without waiting any longer. She's been doing it to others before you, Diana told me. The Ferreras lasted 5 months before they moved. The Nguyen's had almost a year of it. Always people she decides don't fit. You moved in with a younger kid, no partner visible, truck in the driveway instead of a sedan. She has a profile she runs through. I asked Diana if she had ever reported it. She asked me to who? The HOA board was 3 people, 2 of whom had been appointed by Carla. The management company that technically oversaw the association had a form submission portal and a response time measured in weeks. The homeowners who were being targeted were, without exception, people who had concluded that the effort and cost of a formal dispute was more than they could sustain while also holding jobs and raising children. Carla had been running a quiet attrition campaign for years, and it worked because she understood the economics of it better than her targets did. I spent that weekend doing what I do when I encounter a plumbing problem that keeps reappearing. I stopped trying to address the symptom and started mapping the whole system. The HOA documents were public record. I pulled everything, the original CCRs, every amendment filed in the past 9 years, every board meeting minute that had been properly logged, the management company contract, and the financial disclosures that associations in our state are required to file annually. I also pulled the county property records for every parcel in the development, including Carla's. I found in the financial disclosures was interesting. Over 9 years, Carla had approved substantial payments to a landscaping company whose registered address was a P.O. box 2 towns over. The company had no reviews, no online presence, no contractor registration I could find in the state database. The payments totaled somewhere north of $40,000 across several years. I was not certain what that meant yet, but I wrote it down. What I was more immediately certain about was that Carla had 17 documentable violations of her own HOA's rules. Unpermitted fence extension. A flagpole that exceeded the height limits in Section 4.2. Outdoor furniture left visible past the storage deadline in the seasonal guidelines she herself had approved. I documented all 17 with timestamped photos. I also, during this same period, had 3 conversations with neighbors I had come to trust. Diana, a retired postal worker named Franklin Okiki 2 houses down, and a young couple named the Santillans who had received $600 in accumulated citations for issues that, when I walked their property with them, I genuinely could not identify. The pattern Diana had described was consistent across all three households. New arrivals visibly different from the community's demographic median, subjected to escalating citations until either they paid and submitted or they left. The Santilans had been here 8 months and were already discussing whether to sell. I told them to wait. Week 6 brought what I had been half expecting: a citation, $150 for persistent waste management violations. The official language cited repeated failure to prevent debris scatter constituting ongoing disruption to community aesthetics. The citation was dated the morning after the most recent Tuesday incident, which put Carla in the position of having cited me for a mess she had created. There was something almost impressive about it. I submitted a formal written response citing the specific HOA bylaw sections that established proper bin placement, attaching photos documenting my bin's placement in full compliance before each incident, and noting that I was in the process of documenting several concerns about enforcement consistency that I looked forward to discussing at the next board meeting. I also ordered the materials I had been thinking about for 2 weeks. My supplier is a commercial construction wholesaler where I have a trade account for plumbing jobs. Talking to their concrete and structural materials side about what I wanted took about 20 minutes. The short version: I needed something that presented as a standard residential waste receptacle and could survive a vehicle impact at low speed without moving. The structural solution was not complicated, which is how you know it was correct. When you overcomplicate a fix, you are usually compensating for not fully understanding the problem. I understood this problem completely. A steel post 42 inches into the ground, through topsoil and into clay substrate below frost line. A collar welded at grade level. A standard residential bin shell fitted over the collar with 2 low-profile bolts at the base that sat flush with the plastic and were invisible, unless someone was specifically looking for them. The bin was the same model used by 11 other houses on my block. The structural solution was not complicated. A steel post driven 42 inches into the ground. A collar welded at grade level. A standard black residential bin shell fitted over the collar and secured at the base. The visual result was indistinguishable from any other bin on the street. The structural reality was that it was anchored to approximately 4,000 pounds of compacted earth and rebar. The total material cost was around $280. Carla had cost me more than that in replacement bins and cleanup supplies across 11 weeks. I installed it on a Sunday afternoon. The neighbors who knew what was happening, Diana, Franklin, the Santilans, had all been told in advance. I was not planning to keep it secret from anyone in my household. Cleo watched me do it and asked 2 engineering questions that were both more precise than I expected from a 15-year-old. When I finished explaining the mechanics, she thought about it for a moment and said, "So it's not going to move." "That's correct," I told her. She nodded with the specific satisfaction of someone who has watched her family be pushed around for long enough and is pleased to see a different variable enter the equation. The Tuesday after installation, I woke up at 6:15, made coffee, and watched from my kitchen window. Carla's Acura came around the corner at her usual time. Same speed she always used on this stretch, maybe 12 miles per hour. The angle of approach was identical to every previous Tuesday. She had done this enough times that it had become a routine, something she did without particularly thinking about it. What happened next took about 2 seconds. The Acura's front end met the anchored bin and immediately lost the argument. The car stopped. The bin did not move. The sound was the specific dense crack of something that expected to displace a lightweight object encountering instead something with the effective mass of a buried engine block. Both airbags deployed. Steam began rising from the hood. Carla's door opened and she stepped out, and I watched from the window as she approached what was still sitting in exactly the place it had always been, undamaged, and touched it with her hand. I gave her about 90 seconds, then walked outside. I used my most genuinely concerned neighbor voice. I said I heard something and asked if she was all right. I looked at the car and then at the bin and said I had no idea what could have happened. She looked at me, I looked back. Franklin was already on his porch. Diana had come out as well. The Santilans appeared at the edge of their driveway. Nobody said anything. Everyone was watching. Carla called the police. This was the correct decision from her perspective, and it was also the decision I had been hoping she would make. The officer who responded, a woman named Ramirez, was professional and thorough. She took Carla's statement, then took mine. She examined the bin, noting its stability with some visible interest. She asked me if I had modified a standard residential waste receptacle. I told her I had reinforced it against vandalism following 11 weeks of what I believed was intentional property damage. Carla at this point made a significant error. She told Officer Ramirez that she could not understand how a garbage bin had done this to her car because they were not that solid, and that there must be something in it that was not supposed to be there, and that she had noticed it was placed differently than other bins in the neighborhood. Ramirez looked at her for a moment, then wrote something in her notebook. "You're saying you have a basis for comparison," she said. "In terms of how the bin sits relative to previous weeks?" Carla realized what she had said approximately half a second after she said it. Diana was ready. She had been keeping a folder on her kitchen counter since the 4th week of Tuesdays, and she brought it outside now. 12 weeks of security camera footage from the camera she had installed on her garage, each clip showing the same white Acura, the same approach angle, the same impact, the same reversal, the same 30-second pause while Carla observed the aftermath before driving away. Officer Ramirez watched 45 minutes of footage in Diana's kitchen. When she came back outside, she told Carla that she would be in touch and asked her not to leave the area for the next hour. She told me that my bin was legally installed on my property and that her office would be following up on the documentation Diana had provided. The insurance assessor who arrived an hour later spent about 15 minutes examining the car, then came over and knocked on my door to ask if he could take a look at the bin. He measured its stability in several directions. He photographed the base. He was professionally neutral throughout, but I have been around enough damage assessments to read the language of someone who is building toward a conclusion, and the conclusion he was building toward was not favorable to Carla's claim. I got a call from his company 3 days later confirming that the claim had been denied. The letter cited evidence of intentional property damage as the precipitating cause of the incident, which under standard policy language voids coverage for resulting vehicle damage. Let me be clear about what that meant. Carla had spent 11 weeks driving her car into my property, and when the property finally pushed back, her insurance company told her that the car was her problem. The repair estimate I heard later, through Diana, was somewhere around $14,000. The HOA situation took longer but moved in the same direction. I filed formal complaints with the County HOA Oversight Board documenting the pattern of selective enforcement, attaching the Santillans citation records alongside my own, and including the photos I had taken of Carla's 17 rule violations. I also attached a written analysis of the demographic pattern across the targeted households, not as an accusation, but as a documented observation that the Oversight Board could evaluate against the evidence. 7 households in 3 years, all sharing the same demographic characteristics. That is a pattern, not a coincidence, and patterns are documentable. I submitted a financial inquiry to the management company requesting itemized documentation for the landscaping payments that had caught my attention in the annual disclosures. I sent a certified letter to the 2 board members who were not Carla asking for a formal meeting on enforcement consistency. Both board members declined the meeting. One of them resigned from the board 3 weeks later, citing personal time constraints, which I suspected had more to do with having reviewed the financial inquiry I had submitted. The landscaping company turned out to be registered to Carla's brother-in-law. The state contractor database had no record of them ever pulling a permit or completing an inspected job in our county. The $40,000 plus in HOA payments over 9 years appeared to represent, at minimum, a significant conflict of interest and possibly something more serious. The management company, once they received my documented inquiry and understood that it was simultaneously being forwarded to the County Oversight Board and to a real estate attorney I had consulted, began responding with considerably more urgency than their usual form submission portal suggested was possible. Carla resigned from the board 6 weeks after the Tuesday that ended her Acura. She submitted the resignation by email, without explanation, on a Thursday afternoon. The email was addressed to the management company and copied the 2 remaining board members. I was not copied. Diana forwarded it to me within an hour of receiving it. The management company organized an emergency board election. The notice went out to all 127 households. Turnout for HOA elections in a community like Bramblewood Estates is typically around 20%. The election that followed Carla's resignation drew 73% of eligible homeowners, which I was told was the highest participation in the community's history. Franklin O'Keefe ran for the open seat. Diana ran for the presidency. Both won without opposition. The 2 candidates who ran against them withdrew before voting closed. Diana's first action as president was to suspend all pending citations against the Santillans, pending a full review of enforcement records. Her second was to commission an independent audit of HOA finances going back 7 years. The audit found the landscaping company irregularities I had flagged, plus several additional payment categories that warranted referral to the County Oversight Board. Her third action was to establish a clear written procedure for handling homeowner disputes that required documentation, response timelines, and board-level review before any citation could be issued. She posted the procedure on the association website in plain language with a contact form that actually delivered messages to real people. These are not complicated governance structures. They are the minimum that any organization exercising financial authority over people's homes should have had from the start. They are the minimum that any organization exercising financial authority over people's homes should have had in place from the beginning. Cleo finished her junior year and applied to 6 colleges in the fall. Her essay was about watching a problem get approached as an engineering question rather than an emotional one. Her words, not mine. She wrote about the difference between reacting to a recurring failure and identifying the root cause of it. She wrote about how the most durable solutions address the actual structure of a problem rather than its surface symptoms. She said she had learned this from watching her father replace a garbage can. She got into her first choice school in February. I'm not going to pretend that the HOA situation had nothing to do with her choosing to write about what she saw from that kitchen window. The Santillans are still on Alder Court. They mentioned to me recently that they had stopped thinking about selling. Franklin put a small garden in his front yard, marigolds and a few tomato plants along the fence line, nothing that required any architectural review under the new guidelines, just color in a space that had previously been plain grass because previous guidelines had made it easier not to bother. He told me he had been thinking about that garden for 3 years and had decided every spring it was too much of a risk under Carla's regime. Diana updated the seasonal outdoor furniture guidelines to include a 30-day grace period and a written warning notice before any citation could be issued. The neighborhood is quieter on Tuesday mornings. The anchored bin is still in my driveway. I have not had any reason to move it. It sits exactly where I put it on that Sunday afternoon, and it will continue sitting there until I have some reason to install something else, which for the time being I do not. If you're dealing with a pattern of harassment that keeps repeating at the same point, the same person, the same method, the same day of the week, the answer is usually not to defend the same weak point better. The answer is to replace the weak point with something that changes the physics of the situation entirely. Find the thing that keeps failing and build something that cannot fail in the same way. That principle works in plumbing, it works in electrical systems. It turns out it works in driveway conflicts with HOA presidents who have spent years betting that their targets will eventually give up. Drop your HOA story in the comments. The specific ones are the most useful. General frustration is everywhere, but the details are where the patterns are, and the patterns are what helps the next person understand what they are actually dealing with. I will see you next time.